It's First and Goal with your host, Big Bear and the Curtain Guy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to First and Goal. We are in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. We're narrowing down the field of teams. We are at 8 remaining. 3 Big Ten teams in action this week leading up to New Year's Day, 2 of which will face off against each other with sending one home. And we'll get to that as we go through. But let's jump in here. As always, we are your hosts. I'm Big Bear T. Tyler Urbanski.
I'm the Curtain Guy, Cole Schutte.
So the first game we want to talk about as we preview the group of 8 teams remaining, we'll bring the bracket up here. If you're watching us live on Spotify and YouTube, you'll see it on the screen. If you're listening at home or on the road, we'll break it down for you. So Ohio State defeats Tennessee to move on. They will face the number 1 seed Oregon in the Rose Bowl. That is the big matchup that we'll get to here in a little bit on the episode. We have number 2 Georgia will take on number 7 Notre Dame. We have Arizona State at the 4 seed taking on the 5, the Texas Longhorns. And then wrapping it out, we have the number 3 seed Boise State Broncos. They will take on the Big Ten's Penn State Nittany Lions. So I believe the first of the 3 games on New Year's Day will be the Fiesta Bowl. I believe that's a 12 to 1 slot Eastern time game. Let's talk about this. We have Boise State, Penn State. Penn State took on SMU last week, thrashed them, right? Took complete advantage of them. I think that was exactly what we could have expected in that kind of game. Kevin Jennings for SMU was never comfortable. One touchdown, but 3 interceptions, couple of huge interceptions, swung the pendulum of this game forever in the favor of Penn State. As a defense, they had 3 sacks. They had 5 tackles for losses. They were really kind of having their way defensively, and that kind of shows why this is a top 10 defense in the country with Penn State. But now they're moving on to Arizona. They will play Boise State, who has a bye as one of the top 4 conference champions. They're kind of spearheaded on offense with Ashton Genty. That has been the talk most of the season. He's the run-up for the Heisman. He's 134 yards shy of Barry Sanders' single-season rushing record. But that team has to play another level above what they've done all season long. You heard their head coach Danielson was saying that everything that we've given to this point at Boise State, like, we need to take it to another level because this is not going to be good enough to keep pushing forward in this current modern playoff. So let's kind of open up the conversation with that, Cole. From a Penn State standpoint, I know we'll probably focus on the defense, but I just want to kind of get your thoughts on Penn State as they come into this matchup now having played a game rather than having a bye, and where you think that mindset is with them and how they will approach this game with Boise State.
I think this stands true for Penn State, and I think it stands true for all of the teams that got to play 2 weeks ago. I think it is almost a positive that they got to play, right? Not that rest isn't necessarily the worst thing to happen for some of these teams, but these other teams got to rest, come back in for a lot of them, knock a bad taste out of their mouth the way that they ended the season, especially with Penn State and Ohio State specifically. But they were able to come back out on their home field, get one last win for the hometown fans, and now they can ride that momentum into the next matchup. And I think Penn State feels that more so, or as much as anybody in the country, I guess is what I'm trying to say here, because an incredible defensive showing for them. Honestly, I didn't think Drew Aller was really super impressive in the first half, but that defense was absolutely lights out. And you talked about Jennings and his mistakes. And, that was pretty much the difference in the first half. But they got to be riding a supreme high coming into this one, and they're going to be challenged, right? I think everybody knows that the answer to who wins this matchup is going to come down to, can Boise State effectively run the ball, or can Penn State shut it down? And I'm with everybody else, because I think that's where the, whatever way the pendulum swings on that one is the way that this one is going to turn. And it's a very intriguing matchup. I want to hear your viewpoint on it as well, but just kind of perusing through the numbers you're talking about, Penn State has the number 7 rush defense in the country, right? They only give up just over 100 yards a game. It's the best rushing defense that Boise State has faced, other than UNLV, who is a pretty good rush defense, top 25. They're 24th in the country. And they were able to slow Genty down one time in their first matchup, 33 carries, 128 yards. But in the second one, he went for 32 carries for 209 yards. So it is possible, right, that they can have success against these higher end rushing defenses, but they have not seen anything like Abdul Carter and company. So I'm curious to see, what that initial matchup looks like, and to see how they kind of play off of each other. And on the flip side of that coin, Boise State is the best rushing attack that Penn State has seen all year. They ranked number 6 in the country, averaging almost 243 yards rushing a game. Obviously, 98% of that is on the back of Ashton Genty. But the next highest rushing attack that Penn State saw was West Virginia at the very beginning of the season, who was averaging about 186 yards a game. So I'm very curious, and I know it's a low-hanging fruit in this situation, but they're kind of set up in very similar circumstances where it's strength on strength, and both kind of have those open-ended question marks that you're like, I don't really know if there's a clear picture here. So I guess, throwing it back to you, is that what you're seeing from these statistics, or do you have a little less question marks than I do?
Well, the question marks for me is definitely, what does this Boise State offense have in store if Penn State can neutralize Ashton Genty? And I kind of go off of experience, and I wanted to look at this kind of as a come full circle for this entire season, because Boise State in week 2 played at Oregon. So what I was looking at there was, one, Ashton Genty had just arrived, shall we say. I mean, he's kind of been good all season long, but this is still on the beginning end of this historic season he's been on. But then I'm also taking a look at Maddox Madsen, because he took over, won the QB job over Malachi Nelson, who transferred in from USC. What were we going to see from him is the important thing. And it's kind of essentially that question of, Boise State had a great rushing week 1. So Oregon was like, okay, let's look at this running back. Yes, Ashton Genty did get almost 200 yards rushing in that game, rushed at a 7.7 yard per carry pace. But what does the passing ability show on there? Maddox Madsen in that game, I'm talking week 2, because again, we're going to preview this. Week 2, he was 17 of 40, 148 yards, 3.7 yards a pass, 1 touchdown. So really kind of limited within 5 yards. Now, let's compare this to before the bye weeks, the Mountain West Championship game against UNLV in, I believe it was Las Vegas. No, actually, this was a home game in Boise. Correct. I'm incorrect there. Maddox Madsen, again, this was a game where Ashton Genty puts up 200 yards rushing, under 7 yards a carry, but Maddox Madsen was 18 of 27. Okay, better passing stats, right? He's getting a higher completion percentage, better QBR, still only 158 yards passing, and a right around 5 to 6 yards per completion. So where am I going with that is that Penn State's number 1 is neutralize Ashton Genty by way of the offensive line. Okay, Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, lock that down. Okay, so you take Ashton Genty out. Where does Boise go from there? Well, they have to kind of look at Oregon's playbook from the Big Ten title game, they hit mid-range passes. Can they get into the mid-level defense of Penn State? And that all has to come with Maddox Madsen. Now, this is a guy that, again, this offense has been buoyed so much off running the ball that are you really going to put all of your eggs in that basket to throw the ball if the going gets tough? Or are you going to have to get more creative to get Ashton Jeanty the ball? I just don't think that there's enough complexity to that Boise State offense to truly catch Penn State off guard. I think if Penn State can sit in their schemes and do what they do best, don't get fancy, don't get away from what you do, but do what you do best in that defense, I think they're going to be okay here. I don't think that it's not going to necessarily be, I'll say that it's not going to be like an SMU game. Again, Kevin Jennings was rattled. I mean, I don't think he ever got comfortable in that game up in Pennsylvania. But I think in this game, you're going to see Boise settle in at first. They're going to be hyped up. They're going to, take their shot. But I just think that Penn State's too much. That's without even talking about the offense. So here's kind of going to the next segment, because I know you asked me that question. So that's how I feel on Boise at that point. But going to Penn State, what concerns me about Penn State, this isn't just this game, this is kind of going forward into the playoff, is depth, okay? Bo Perbula is gone. You have Drew Aller, and yes, at one point this season, kind of leading up to that Ohio State game earlier in the year, Drew Aller had a small injury bug, right? I mean, this is a guy that's taken all these snaps, taken a lot of pain. If Drew Aller gets hurt, I essentially think that Penn State's in trouble, because Ethan Grunkemeyer came in and threw 2 passes in the first round game. His first pass was an interception, and then he completed his next one. But that is a very, very hefty stage to put a backup quarterback in. And we're not talking about Georgia, where he just kind of has to give it to the running back and facilitate. I mean, that's a tough stance. So Drew Aller, a guy who has had injury issues in the past, has to consider his health in these couple games. And I do think for Penn State on offense, it's going to have to be establish the run early. And then Andy Kotelnicki, as we've talked before, is really shown himself in recent weeks about his creativity and schemes and offensive sets with the tight end, the offensive lineman, wide receiver, how he can get Tyler Warren out there in space. So coming home with that one. For Penn State, if they're going to blow this game open like they did with SMU, what would you say is like number one priority on that list for their offense?
I think it starts and ends with Drew Aller. Because what I think a lot of things that gets lost in the shuffle is that Boise State actually has a pretty solid run defense as well. And that happens a lot, right? Teams that are very excellent at running the football most of the times know how to defend it pretty well, on the flip side of that coin. So they're ranked 14th in the country, and Penn State has shown against some matchups that they struggle at times to run the football effectively. So I don't think this is a case where Penn State bottles up Ashton Jeanty and then just forces the rock down Boise State's throat. I think it will have to be Drew Aller making the throws. Everybody loves to sit there and talk about his potential, his NFL potential. He's got the size, he's got the build, he's got the arm. Well, now I want to see it, and I want to see it consistently. I talked about it when we first started this segment. Watching him against SMU, I wasn't really blown away with anything that he was doing. Jennings made the crucial death mistakes for SMU, but Aller wasn't necessarily making the winning plays either. So I want to see that from him. And I feel like I keep repeating myself because I want to see those consistent, throws. And I guess I'll call them NFL-esque throws, those out throws on time, on target, that helps Penn State and their offense stay on schedule, move the ball down the field, because you're going to need a good chunk of points to beat this Boise State team. I don't think this is a game where you should look at it and be like, nah, we can win this 17-14. I don't think that's the scenario here. I think you're going to have to look at a 30-plus type of scoring affair if you really want to feel comfortable about your chances of going to the semifinal. So I believe that that starts with Drew and making those consistent throws and putting Penn State in position to succeed, and kind of riding the momentum that I felt like he built in the second half against SMU. So that's where I'm at. Are you in a similar boat, or do you think that it kind of hinges on Katron Allen and Nick Singleton?
Well, that's why I was saying they need to establish the run, is because without it, that all falls on Drew Aller. And this is in the SMU game, he only threw the ball like 25 times total, for like $150 passing yards. I mean, it wasn't a whole lot throwing the ball, and especially in a game where you kind of had more control, it felt like they just took their foot off the gas with him, handed it off and ran. I mean, there was 40 carries for Singleton and Allen and the rushing company. But then I kind of factored, okay, weather factor, cold, home game. Sure. I went back to Big Ten title game in the Dome. Again, climate controlled, comfortable. Aller threw the ball just about 40 times against Oregon, over 200, about 226 total yards passing. He did have 3 touchdowns. He had 2 interceptions though. So maybe in a more comfortable atmosphere, again, we're talking about Phoenix in the Dome, it's going to be about as perfect weather conditions as you can get for a football game. Maybe you see Penn State try to open up passing the ball, but those 2 interceptions kind of loom out there. So I'm not 100% how good Boise's secondary is, but if they can force a couple takeaways to open up more opportunities on the offensive side for them, like there's a chance that this can be a really tight-knit fight. I do think there's some people that think that this is, Penn State's going to steamroll and roll, and it's possible, right? We didn't necessarily think that every single game this past weekend was going to be a blowout. That was kind of the most disappointing thing about the first round of playoff. But when you're looking at this one, I kind of think that Boise might be one of the first teams in this playoff that people are underrating or overrating. No, underrating. I'm correct there. Yeah. We've seen them play at least one big team, one other playoff caliber team so far. And they held their own early in the season or not. So kind of to bring it around when we get here to our picks, I just wanted to recap again the big pieces on this Penn State defense. Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton. These are guys that are game wreckers, and take the words out of my mouth, but it's right from Boise State's head coach. He has 63. Abdul Carter has 63 total tackles, 11 sacks, 2 forced fumbles this season. He's a 3-time All Big Ten selection, and he was voted the 24 Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. So that's as good as it gets coming on the other side of the ball for you. And this is, again, a very loaded Penn State defensive front that is ready to get off the ball and come at you. So it's not going to be an easy game, but kind of going back to the picks, Cole, let's kind of give them out. Who do you think wins this game, and what do you have for a score?
Yeah, ultimately, I do think that Penn State has more options in which to score on offense, than what Boise State does. And I really think that's what it comes down to. I'm not sitting here and saying that Boise State doesn't deserve to be here and all that other bullshit. They absolutely deserve to be here. I think they are going to come out and they are going to throw haymakers. But at the end of the day, I just think that, I have said it before and I'll say it again. I'm a very big person of when you look at teams on paper, how many dudes do you got? How many nationally recognized dudes that you got? And for Penn State, they just have a few handful more than what Boise State does. And I think that ultimately pushes that in their favor. I have it Penn State 33, Boise State 24. Like I said, I think it kind of goes back and forth, but ultimately I think Penn State does enough to bottle up Genty just enough to get them to the semifinal matchup. But, Boise State's also 3-0 in the Fiesta Bowl in their history, so you never know. We might see some wild shit.
And I think that Penn State's going to come in here after having that really stellar first round game. And I think that they might be overlooking Boise just a little bit. That's my hunch, is they're going to come in, they're going to be a little relaxed, and they shouldn't be. You can't be in a playoff game. So when I was saying that Drew Aller might start throwing the ball, I think there's a good chance that he gets picked off early. And I do think that kind of puts Penn State back on their heels. Now, we've talked about the two defensive fronts being really, really stout, and there's a chance that this is really low scoring in the first half for me. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking kind of the opposite of big explosive first half. I'm thinking this is going to be, I'm just going to say like a 10-3 type halftime score. That's my hunch. Again, this totally wrong. We'll talk about it next week if it is, but I have this being a Penn State victory, but I have Boise State covering, and I have it being under 53 total points. I actually have this finishing out at like 27-20 in favor of Penn State. I do think the second half is where they're going to kind of get their shit together. They're going to come out and be like, all right, come on, it's time to go. It's time to play. And I think that's where they take control. But I do think that first half for Boise is where they can take advantage and make this thing a game. But yeah, I will take Penn State in the long run here. Again, I'll give the score 27-20 in favor of the Nittany Lions. Which takes us to the other Big Ten game playing this week that anybody who's been following the show for a long time clearly knows that we were going to go pretty well in depth for this one. As a Duck fan, as Oregon being a number one seed, being number one in the country, currently undefeated, most people in that circumstance kind of have a bit of like feeling loose. You're not so uptight. You're not, as some would say, shit and bricks, but this is potentially the national championship of this playoff. Now, our good buddies down in the SEC would probably say no, because it just means more down there, right? That's what Tennessee thought. And then they met the cold weather of Columbus, Ohio. So, Cole, I'm going to turn to you first because Ohio State played, obviously, a round one game. They took Tennessee behind the woodshed, did inexplicable things to the Vol takeover. I want to hear how you feel about that Ohio State game because, again, this was a team that pulled a complete 360 from where they were weeks ago. Showed you what they're capable of. Without kind of taking more words from your mouth, I'll turn that over, and then we'll kind of circle back into the Rose Bowl talk.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest takeaway for probably myself and every other Buckeye fan out there. It was both incredible and almost justifying in a lot of ways. It was cathartic, right? To get that, to kind of wipe that taste of that Michigan loss out of your mouth and to watch this team perform at the level that we all knew it was capable of since the summer. And then it's equally frustrating knowing that we came out with whatever fucking game plan that was against Michigan. Because you see when this team plays to its strengths, it's dominant. It's one of the most deadly offenses in all of college football. And it's paired with a highly aggressive defense now that is allowed to play to its strengths. And so you can see why so many people had picked the Buckeyes to win the national championship. Because that was the team that we all expected to see week in and week out throughout 2024. So now the question becomes, can you do it again? right? Can you come back out and avenge one of your 2 losses to, I agree with you, what is one of the other best teams in college football? And this, we talked about this before we started the podcast. It feels like 2022 against Georgia in the Peach Bowl. It just feels like these are the 2 teams that should be playing for the national championship. And yeah, we might be biased because we're a Big Ten podcast, but from beginning to end, they just have seemed to be at a different caliber. Now, I'd accept Texas or maybe Georgia in that conversation before Carson Beck got hurt, but these 2 really have kind of stood out from the rest. So it's awesome that we get to see them play against each other, and it equally sucks that it seems almost trivial in the fact that they're playing in a quarterfinal matchup and not for the national championship. So those are my initial thoughts. And I know you and I are both going to have, quite a bit of dialogue going back and forth in our fair share of monologues. But what do you think about now the almost month layoff that the Ducks have had before they get ready to play in this Rose Bowl?
It leads you to feel a bit concerned, just the fact that you haven't played actual game live reps in several weeks. But what I've grown to love about the coaching staff that Oregon has is that they treat every single practice like it's a live game. It's why they have a lot of practice. Well, not a lot, but sometimes in the most crucial game weeks, they have big injuries because they're playing full speed, full contact. I mean, like every rep is a game. I was listening to interviews before we came on the show. I was listening to defensive coordinator Tosh Lupois. He felt that the best way that their team can show how prepared they are is every single day in practice. It's just going to be a full onslaught. They have the ability to hit the weight room. They have the ability to stay loose and rested and kind of come in at full strength, but you have to keep punching all week long in practice. Otherwise, you're going to be complacent. And I think that really shows when you get into live reps. So I feel okay about that. I feel like coaching staffs of years past, I would not feel comfortable with that. I would be kind of concerned that they're not going to be locked in, but I do feel okay. I mean, I just think that that's the kind of guy that Dan Lanning is. His team's going to be locked in. He's always going to have some sort of mantra. So I guarantee they're sitting in team meetings this week and he's got something on the projector and the PowerPoint. And it's, again, we'll find out maybe a week from now, like what that message is for his team. But between now and then, the only ones that know what's going on are inside the Avalon, inside the complex. So yeah, what I kind of want to do now as we get into this matchup, because we didn't really get a chance to do it for the first one. We both know these teams extremely well. So I kind of want to go by position group and just kind of talk about them, because and maybe when we pick one, we'll pick the other, like why you think, again, who against what will do well. And I mean, it's okay to have disagreement, right? This is the whole reason why we watch these games. So I'd love to hear these points, but let's start off with, again, I'll start on defense. So I'll talk about Oregon in the secondary. You can take on Ohio State in terms of the running backs and the or the wide receivers, however you choose. But in that matchup in particular, how do you feel going into this Rose Bowl?
Oddly enough, I think it's the same way that I feel about Oregon's wide receivers against Ohio State's defensive backs. I think you have good on good in both scenarios. And that's not just because you and I are friends and we're going to sit here and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I think we equally saw in that first matchup that defensive backs made plays, but the wide receivers also made plays on them, because there are a lot of guys that are going to be playing for a very long time on Sundays on both sets of groups. And so I think you're going to see a lot of the same, honestly. Don't be surprised. I'm going to continue to kind of roll with it, where I think this is another situation where, and we'll talk about the quarterbacks and again, but Dylan Gabriel and Will Howard, don't be surprised if they throw an interception, just as don't be surprised if you see some humongous plays that happen,
Right.
some 30, 40, 50 yard, completions that happen, because it's good on good. Eventually the dam is going to break one way or the other. And so I think for both matchups, and not to kind of cut you off on whatever your thoughts are, I think you're pretty equal in terms of competitive advantage one way or the other. So you're going to see success for both ends of it. It's just going to come down to where's the success, who has the success in the critical moments of the game.
Right. Well, and for me, it's going to be about if Ohio State's biggest strength, again, kind of based off the Tennessee game, was how well they threw the ball and spread it out to G. Scott, Jeremiah Smith, and Emeka Egbuka, like how well they did that. Is that your mindset of limiting? So if Oregon comes out with the secondary, again, we're talking Jabbar Muhammad, we're talking Nico Reed, Kobe Savage, Brandon Johnson, Dante Manning. So what I was watching again, the recap of the first matchup, and there were some plays where Ohio State had schemed it decently where Jeremiah Smith leaked out on the route because you had Jabbar Muhammad was playing it short. So he came in as if it was a curl. Jeremiah Smith then zagged out. And so then he had to play catch up. And again, even in those, you had some really contested plays. So, I mean, are we surprised if there's going to be a lot of maybe penalty calls? No, there's going to be a guy on a wide receiver all the time. So importance to avoid penalty will be turn your head, don't face guard, because I guarantee in these crucial games, they're going to get flag happy. So it's going to be about containing the game or who's going to control the game. And again, we're going to say this early because the mantra I've always followed, and I know you've said it in the past too, is just if you put the game in the hands of the ref, like don't be surprised if they blow it. So for either one of these teams, like don't even leave a doubt. They're gonna go full blow, and you gotta take control, and you gotta get scores, I guess, at almost out of reach. That should be both teams' mindset, because that way you don't have to worry about a ref inserting themselves into a game. But I think defensively, what concerns me a little bit is we didn't see a whole ton of explosion from Ohio State in that first matchup. What they did well was, I think, playing to the edges with their passing game. I think the 2 touchdown passes I saw in the first half were, again, on the outside, right along the sideline. They wasn't really over the middle. They had a little bit over the middle to G. Scott, but they played the edges very well. So I think that they're going to want to stretch out the secondary. Whereas then for the Oregon secondary is, what haven't they showed you? So maybe a little bit of option for the running back and just past the line of scrimmage. I mean, we know that Oregon doesn't defend the tight end very well. So that's, I guess, where I'm circling into too, is just don't give up the middle of the field. That's what concerns me with the Oregon secondary. And because the more you allow Ohio State to beat you here and then do a run to the outside and then beat you on a short pass and then take you deep. I mean, if they can get you in a spot where you're second guessing, I think that you're going to be at a bit of a disadvantage. So, I just think that, like you said, it's dude on dude. But again, don't overthink, right? These DBs have been watching film for several weeks now. You have to do what you do best and stick to your fundamental technique rather than kind of focus in on one thing, because then if you know he does this and that and this, well, you're going to be spinning in circles while the Buckeyes run downfield. So that's my thought on that topic.
I think you bring up a really good point of one of the biggest things with the Tennessee game is Ohio State dictated tempo, and they utilize their strengths to then set up other plays. It's something that a lot of offensive coordinators love to do it, but Chip Kelly and Ryan Day are just a little bit more adept at setting up future plays because they'll give very similar looks that branch out into different routes. And so if they can find success on those early routes, that's how they get teams set up in certain situations because they think that they have the correct defense called for a certain scenario. And that's where, they love to pull the rug out from underneath you. So I definitely agree on that. And on Ohio State side, clearly we saw Denzel Burke have one of the worst games of his entire career, not just the season, against Oregon. So the first question on everybody's mind is, can he clean it up? Right? Because he got torched. He got burned on a lot of double moves. And so he needs to learn to be patient with his eyes and not get sucked in so that he doesn't get torched on that. And understanding that, Ohio State's probably going to go zone a lot. And, if Gabriel has time, he's going to hit those spots, but it's not the end of the world, right? It's bowing up when you need to do it. And making the plays when they come to you. So I know we're kind of saying the same thing in different capacities, but I think both fan bases, if you're expecting some type of absolute lockdown on either side of it, where the quarterback only goes for 121 yards, I think you're setting yourself up for massive disappointment on Wednesday.
That's why I thought it was so funny. The week before the first matchup, again, both these teams had just played Michigan State. And I just took the liberty of looking at the stat lines for both teams. They were essentially identical as far as the defensive performance, offensive performance. And I had told you and Jeff Badger, who's not on the episode with us this week, but I was like, are we looking at the same team? And then we played the first game, and it was a difference of 1 point. And both teams had some big plays. They had some small mishaps, but and again, miscues that took points off the board. But I'm sitting here looking at this like, that's why it feels like we're saying the same thing, is because these teams are so damn identical in terms of what their identities are right now that, you talk about any simulation, you put even teams up against each other. Of course, it's going to be back and forth. But so next one, let's go to, I kind of want to talk about the trenches. Now, this can incorporate linebackers and defensive line versus offensive line. Okay. I'll start on offense for this one. So for the Buckeyes right there, you guys got Jack Sawyer, you got JTT, Tyleik Williams. And the linebacker part, I don't necessarily, you might want to consider Caleb Downs there. I know he plays safety, but he kind of has converted in the past. So I've always kind of looped him in with linebacker play. And the reason I do is because I think back of last year's Rose Bowl, he made such a crucial interception in the first couple plays of that game, kind of playing in the linebacker level. So that's a guy who steps up at this point, and he steps up in this type of game. And so Dylan Gabriel has to be aware of where he's at, because he has an ability to make an impact early. But like you said, Dylan Gabriel's going to need time. So it starts with the guys up front. What I'm happy about with Oregon's front line is the first 3 games of the season, everyone had talked about this offensive line was sporadic. They were giving up a bunch of sacks. They had given up more sacks than they did like the last 2 seasons. People were worried that, again, they're not going to be able to protect Gabriel throughout the season. They righted that ship by shifting around a little bit. They moved Iapani Lalaulu to center. That was like the anchor that should have kind of been obvious. I thought he was going to be the center at the start of the season, but wasn't. So then they get Nashad Strother in there on the interior guard spot. And then, on the tackles, Josh Connerly Jr. on the left, Johnny Cornelius, a 5th-year senior on the right. Like, this has been a really solid offensive line, and I'm thankful of that, but they do have to hold up again. Now, the first matchup, Ohio State wasn't able to get any sacks on Oregon. They did get 2 tackles for loss. And so the question's going to be, can you replicate that performance? Because that is going to be the crucial part to getting Jordan James going in the running game, to give Dylan Gabriel not just time to pass, but time to change the play when the coverages are so good in that secondary we just talked about. So I think that I kind of feel okay there is what I'm saying. I think that, you do have good on good But I think that right now, at least on the Oregon offensive front, I feel like they're going to be able to give some time. I don't know what your thoughts on that, considering, again, they had a great showing last week with Ohio State's defensive front. How do you feel how they come in?
I think this is going to feel this is the one aspect of the game where I feel it's going to be very different than the first time around. This defense, since Dillon Gabriel, they're not getting a passing touchdown. Okay, they've given up average 121 yards passing per game, and a lot of people will automatically go, "Oh, that's the defensive backs." No, it's because Jim Knowles has finally been able to ramp up the pressure the way that he wants to, the way that we envisioned when we brought him in. So I think that is going to be one of, if not the most crucial aspect of this game, is how does Oregon's offensive line handle the way that Ohio State brings pressure, because it's from all over the place. They love to sim pressure. They love to bring corners. They love to, take two guys over on a gap and bring the linebacker in on the back end. They do all kinds of different things, and it feels like they've really started to utilize the strengths of Cody Simon and Sonny Styles, blanked on that for a second, what they're best at. And I feel like that has made a world of difference. And I'm not sitting here and going to tell you that, oh, we didn't do anything. We played vanilla. We played our base. But we certainly were not as aggressive the first time around. And I think everybody kind of learned their lesson that Dillon Gabriel is not that cat that you can just let sit back and go, because he's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in all of college football. And he did exactly what he's capable of the first time around, is he dotted you up. When he has time, he's going to put the ball in the bucket. So I think they know that they have to speed his clock up. They know they have to get him out and force him to make a little bit more uncomfortable throws. It's not that he can't make those throws on the run. We've seen him do that throughout his entire career, not just at Oregon. But you're at least not letting him be in rhythm and continue to put pinpoint strikes out there, against that secondary. So I think that is going to be the biggest question mark that's up in the air for what happens with this game. Is that aggressiveness from the defensive line and the overall blitz structure that Jim Knowles brings. For the Ohio State offensive line, this is not even close to being the same offensive line that played at Outson. I think everybody who has access to the internet knows that. So I want to see us do what we did with Tennessee, move the pocket, have, running schemes where you pull guys to, kind of cover up space, run counters, run to the strengths of what Chip Kelly does, and put your guys in a position to succeed, because you're not going to run straight at Oregon. That you're not going to run those stretch zones to the boundary. You're not going to run in between the tackles without any pulling guards. You're just not going to find success. If you attempt to do that, it's going to look a lot like Michigan, and you're going to get fucking nowhere. So that is my very simplistic thought about it, is Oregon, they have Birch back. They have a very excellent defensive front. You have to find ways to protect Will Howard, protect the running back, protect the offensive linemen, and put them in position to succeed. And I think it involves doing all those things that I mentioned. And then I also think it involves going tempo, because I think that is one way that you can kind of counteract talent like that, is go fast, get them tired. Don't give them the opportunity to sub and continue to attack them. Because like I said, if you just sit back and just try to play them man up, they're just going to tee off on you. So I'll flip it back to you on kind of your thoughts of the Oregon defensive front against Ohio State's offensive line, and kind of what you feel now after watching their success against Tennessee.
Well, I never thought I'd hear you say that you're going to have Chip Kelly run tempo on Oregon to kind of get them gassed. That was not on my bingo card of life. But so Oregon's defensive front, yes, they get Birch back. I think that helps, because now there's another guy you have to deal with outside of Mateo Uiagalelei, who has been having a phenomenal sophomore season. But on the interior defensive front, you have Derek Harmon, who has had a stellar season after transferring over from Michigan State. But when you mentioned tempo, here's where I was concerned. And I did think about tempo because watching it in the Big Ten title game, the way that they used it to affect Jamari Caldwell, which, again, Oregon has not been known to have these really huge nose tackles on the defensive front. Jamari Caldwell's a huge dude, and he's great. He's kind of a game wrecker. You saw him a little bit in the first matchup where he was kind of bottling up. I can't remember if it was Henderson or Quinshon Judkins on the outside, but it just looked like a bear wrestling around with, a smaller animal, I guess I'll say. But then you see in the Big Ten title game where Penn State used tempo, and you see he's on the sideline, he's huffing and puffing. And I'm like, that's just not something I'm used to, having a dude that big that can't get enough air. So that's one thing that Ohio State probably wants to look at. But for Oregon, I'm hoping that with this kind of time off, maybe they used a bit of conditioning, again, to build up maybe some endurance. I'm not saying you're going to want to drop weight, whatever, but like that's at least something that's a bit of concern. You have to have your team ready for a little bit of tempo like that. I like the way that they bring pressure too on Oregon's front. It's Tatum Tuioti, who is kind of like the jack position, but and then you have Kobe Savage, who brings a bit of the safety blitz factor. He throws some serious blows when he comes in there like a missile. Jeffrey Bassa, again, is the field general. He's going to be the crux of this whole defense because he has to make sure they're on the same page. Yes, we've seen that there were some circumstances with Penn State's offensive creativity and play calling that they weren't necessarily gap sound in that game once the play was shifted. So recognizing some of these formations is going to be important, and I know they've had time to look at it, but it's a factor. And so I don't necessarily see Bassa blitzing as much. I see him probably playing a bit more of a zone over the middle, watching for maybe like a little bit of a tight end route with G. Scott perhaps. But Bryce Betcher, another guy we haven't really talked about. I mean, there's a lot of guys on this Oregon defense that have had a factor this year, whether they're getting into the backfield or they're trying to play zone coverage and try and disrupt a passing game, that I think that, Will Howard might have the ability to stretch out some explosive plays, but I'm curious to see. I think Oregon's going to play better in that middle part of the field than they have this season. I think that's been an emphasis in this build-up, that they want to be better in that realm. But I hope that they don't sacrifice, the X plays as a opposite. So, all right, let's go to the last position groups. We're talking about the quarterbacks and the skills position. We kind of did wide receivers, so I guess we'll talk about the running backs. Let's just talk quarterbacks and running backs because they're kind of the crux of this entire thing. Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, Travion Henderson, and Quinshon Judkins versus Jordan James, Noah Whittington. I'll let you go first because I just rambled. So tell me about your leader.
I think for it's funny that we're discussing this because it seems all of Twitter has been in an uproar because Kyle McCord threw for a bunch of yards this year, and everybody was like, "Oh," and they went and got bum McCord or a bum, Will Howard, and it's like, do you guys actually watch football, or you guys just look at numbers and go, that one's higher, butter? Because it's pretty apparent that Will Howard was an absolute upgrade over McCord. The way that he's able to maneuver the pocket. His deep throw at times leaves some things to be desired, but he has the ability to do it. And we saw that against Tennessee, and we've seen it throughout the season. But it's that mid-range game that I think he excels the most. And I think that is really what's kind of ignited this offense, periodically in and out of the season, is the way that he's able to hit those hitch routes out at the sidelines, the wheel routes to the running backs. And like you mentioned earlier in this section, I think that's going to be a big part of the game plan as well, is getting guys like Travion Henderson out into the flat out on those wheel routes, because that's a very difficult matchup for a lot of linebackers to have, is to have to go against somebody like Travion. And I know you mentioned a couple of plays when you went back and rewatched the first matchup where, JJ was, kind of broke free, but there were a lot of plays where Travion was open too, and Will didn't trust the dump down to let him go to work. And so I'm kind of hoping that is something that is taken advantage of when it comes available on Wednesday. For Oregon, I talked a lot about Gabriel. Obviously, just not a dude you can let sit back and be in rhythm, because he's played way too much college football. He's way too accurate. He threw for 341 yards the last outing. He'll do it again if that's what you let him do. And then on terms of the running backs, I haven't been able to watch a whole lot of Whittington, but I have been thoroughly impressed with Jordan James as a guy who just frankly doesn't ever fall backwards. And I think that is one of the highest compliments that you can give to a running back, because even when I've watched him and he's not necessarily been super explosive or, just ripping off 20-yard runs, he falls forward. So instead of a 1-yard gain or a, net loss, it's a 3-yard gain. Right. And that's the type of stuff that has helped Oregon and their offense stay on schedule all year long. So that's a guy that you got to wrap him up, and you got to have multiple guys there. It's got to be a team effort to tackle a guy like that, because we watched a lot of times throughout the season where he can squirm out of that first one and he'll go rip off another 12. So I know that you'll enlighten me a little bit more on Whittington, but I think obviously Gabriel, everybody knows Gabriel. Everybody knows that he's the guy that makes the ship sail. But I think Jordan James is kind of the guy that you got to really lock in on, especially when it comes to wrapping up and form tackling.
Yeah, Jordan James is a guy that always hangs around 5 yards a carry. I mean, throughout the season, it's kind of been his MO. And this is a guy that Ohio State fans should kind of look at and be proud of a little bit. I mean, it's weird to say that because it's an opposing team, but this is a guy that when Dan Lanning was hired as head coach, he went out and pulled Carlos Loughlin for running back coach. And before they really got settled into Eugene, the first thing Loughlin did was go and get Jordan James, who was going to go to Georgia. And he was probably going to sit on their bench because you can see how their running back system's set up there right now. But he said he pulled him to Oregon. And not only did he pull him to Oregon, but as a freshman and even last year as a sophomore, he had him compete with Noah Whittington and Bucky Irving. And he told him, you keep working. Like, he never picked out who his running back was going to be. It was just kind of a committee. Whoever plays better in practice is going to get the workload. So Jordan James is a dude who's had to earn everything that he's had to get. And this has been a really fantastic season to see him kind of lead as the bell cow. Noah Whittington, again, coming off of that big injury last year, he's had a couple games where he's just kind of shown up, and I'm like, wow, this is the dude that we saw a year ago. But a lot of games that he's been, I guess I'll say, tempered results compared to what I expected. But I do think he's going to be full go. He's going to show his best in this game because he says he's going to give it his all for one last go, and he's going to go out swinging. Quarterback wise, I know you talked about Dylan Gabriel, but I like to say he's cool as a cucumber. This is a guy that had a couple of games early in the season where he was a little rattled, threw a couple of bad pick interceptions, especially in the red zone, that left you scratching your head a little bit and feeling like, okay, this is not so great. But he has not just righted that ship, he has filled the sail, he's sent it off to sea, and he's about to bring it into port if he can navigate it through the windstorm. So circling everything together, offensive line giving him time to find his options. Again, we saw it in the first matchup. We've seen it in a bunch of games. Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, Terrence Ferguson, Trayshawn Holden's going to play. Hopefully he keeps his saliva in his mouth again. We don't have to have another one of those instances. that Jeff Badger would love to see a fight first snap. Just the entire Ohio State defense and Trayshawn, they just drop gloves and they go at it. But that's not going to happen. Not on Dan Lanning's watch. And so I do expect that he is going to be composed, even if he gets rattled. Okay, send pressure, get him uncomfortable, but all he really does is he adjusts the play. So I think back again, the first meeting, there was the one play that he ran for a touchdown. Now, again, that you could look at that as JTT just jumped the wrong option, right? He took the running back instead of the quarterback leaked out, got to the outside. Changes that, the whole complexity of that, drive might be different, but he does a good job of escaping the pocket. He may not run right away, but I've seen on like fourth down options, he'll find somebody right at the last second or try and put the ball out there. And for their credit, like it's worked out for them, knock on wood so far, but he is a blessing, I guess I'll say, as a team that just lost Bo Nix. So going up against Will Howard now, since that game, as Will Howard has said, like he's had nightmares about the finishing of that game. I don't think you're going to see Will Howard buckle at any point in the game, let alone late in the game. I think that he's focused on finishing. I think that you're going to see a little bit of laser focus out of him. And the difference between these two guys is Will Howard's 6'4", Dylan Gabriel is listed at 6 foot. He's probably just under it if we're being real. Will Howard probably has a better chance of not getting batted down at the line of scrimmage as opposed to Dylan Gabriel. So the importance to really lock in on Will Howard is going to be, can you keep him from getting out? Because he'll run. I think Will Howard will probably have a better chance of running the ball than Dylan Gabriel in this. But then on the running back side, yeah, Oregon did a decent job, quote unquote, kind of working with the running backs in the first matchup. It still gave up 141 yards rushing. Quinshawn was the lesser of the two. Travion ended up with that huge 53-yard run that almost put him in the end zone in the first half. So, and that was actually a boundary play, which is funny enough, the play that we felt like the Buckeyes need to kind of abandon. Like that was one of their biggest plays in the early part of that matchup. So, but you can't rely on that, obviously. Don't rely on it and you'll have success. So I think that both these teams are going to have such a handful. I mean, we're sitting here now at this point in the episode. We've gone through every position group. And I think we've talked about how either team could take advantage of the other. And so as a fan of the game, a fan of Ohio State, a fan of Oregon, a fan of the Big Ten, as you're listening to us in this episode, we're kind of going to bring it full circle and we're going to give you our picks as to how this is going to fall out. Leave us a comment on what you think the score of this game is going to be, because I'm really curious to see how all of you feel this thing shakes out in the end here on New Year's Day. So Cole, I'll turn to you first and give you the courtesy of first dibs and first pick. Who do you think wins this game? And I guess why or how?
I'm going to keep riding my little doubt train that I think I've sewed in right now. So
don't do that to me.
I picked Tennessee to beat the Buckeyes, and that turned out pretty well. So I think I'm just going to continue to ride that. And I'll say Oregon 34, Ohio State 31. I think it looks a lot like it did last time, where I think we constantly say it on this show, just a sledgehammer match where both teams make plays, give up plays, just they take huge body blows at one another. But ultimately, the one, I think, crippling defect for Ohio State is the field goal kicker. And even though he was actually 2 for 2 against Oregon in the first matchup, I think that Oregon's kicker ultimately is the deciding factor in this one with a late field goal that puts it away for the Ducks. I just think, I don't know. I think Ohio State is kind of found its identity, and they will find the motivation to compete. but I think eventually losing an All-American left tackle and an All-American center is eventually going to come back to haunt them. And I'll go with this game as the time that it does.
Okay, so if I pick Oregon, I'm just a dick. I think I'm going to find a way to deflect on this. I'm going to give you two scenarios for victory, one for each team here. So for Oregon, the way to victory, other than, I guess, replicating what you did last time, being able to break open and get explosive plays is one thing. Being able to find Evan Stewart deep, Tez Johnson deep, maybe even get Tez Johnson over the middle, chunk plays away. You cannot have many stalled drives, either of these teams. The more stalled drives you have, the bigger chance that you're not just losing margin, like you're risking the margin of victory. I mean, is almost gone, and you're going to be behind the 8 ball if you keep giving the ball away. Now, I think for Ohio State, their path to victory is certainly based on being able to disrupt the game with some X plays. This is not an Autzen Stadium game. This is about as neutral site as it gets, because as much as Oregon fans would love to fill that stadium with 75%, they're going to be lucky to get 40 to 45% of that stadium. That's just the truth. I think any Oregon fan across the country will tell you that when it comes to like the Rose Bowl, they just don't travel as well as you think. So again, when you're playing a team like Ohio State, who has fans across the entire country, I think they're going to fill those stands, even with this short notice type last minute ticket buying experience that they're going through right now. So Oregon loses that home field advantage. I think that the path to victory for Ohio State is bringing that pressure on Gabriel and then maybe making him force an interception or two that could then swing the pendulum in the offensive favor. And I've never trusted Oregon being a last second kick away from victory. I just never sat right. Even now having a kicker that they've nicknamed Automaticus. And then, like, I think one of his first kicks of the season went wide, and I was like, what? I mean, you could just think of the explicits that came out. So I think that is what can ride Ohio State to victory here. So both teams. All right. So here, if Oregon wins, I'm going to say it's going to be one of those where I don't think field goal game. I think it's going to be those where the team who's losing needs a touchdown late and might come up short. So it's like a 4-point margin. I'm going to say like 37-33. I don't know where I came up with that, but that's where I came up with that. Now, Ohio State wins. I think that would mean I almost think it's a little lower scoring at that point. And that's where I'm sticking with 33-28 for Ohio State. Again, a 4 to 5 point margin. I don't think necessarily field goal game. These are teams that like to score, and I don't think that you're going to get them in a margin that they need a field goal to tie it. So keep it in that, last minute, 2-minute drive type, try to come back and score and win situation for either one of them. I'll give you my pick behind the scenes after we're done here, just so that, the fans at home know that I've deflected. I'm not an ass, and both teams have a good chance for victory. So
spoken like a true, well, you're not even a lawyer. Do accountants speak like that? I feel like accountants are way more black and white.
I mean, we're rule followers, so oh wow, I just broke a rule then, didn't I? I didn't give my pick. Don't tell my boss. So, all right, now while we wrap out the show here, because we've given such a deep dive that our fans at home are probably taking Tylenol from the absolute mind-filling. You can see what our mindsets are like during game day, I hope, folks. I mean, we're about as anal as it gets. But, all right, so let's wrap it out. What's your drink of choice for game time?
Oh, the same thing that it has been for years now. I got to go Captain and Vanilla Coke. You rocking with the Fireball?
Now, are you going to drink that straight through? Does it shift it for good or bad?
Yeah, I've most of the time I will drink it all the way through. If I feel like the game is in hand and I want to celebrate a little bit, quote unquote, I will, on occasion, I've been known to flip to a frosty float, which is some Crown Vanilla and root beer, if those are available to me. But other than that, it's me and the captain.
Now, in the past, I've been known to be a Fireball and Diet Coke. In the last year and a half, I've just been, you give me the flask and it's got it in it and we're just sipping it. I mean, not necessarily shots, but when I need it, I need it. And if I feel the game is working against me, I'm probably going to break out my new bottle of bourbon because I'm going to need something a little stronger and help me go to sleep. And if I feel like the game is working out in my favor, I probably will just stop drinking because I'm not going to believe that it's actually happening. That's my mindset. I did not sit down for a single minute of the first game. I probably will not sit down for a single minute of the second one. And if it is, it's going to be like seconds interval before I stand up. So yeah, bring it on.
Hey man, these are, this is what we want. This is what we wait all season for. So, regardless, I'm excited. You don't get any better college football than the granddaddy of them all. So it's exciting. It's an honor. It's a privilege to watch a game of this magnitude in a setting of this magnitude. And like we always say, man, kick the ball off. Let's go.
Are we throwing any bonus points on this week's goal line stand? As you can see, these margins here are getting a little close.
They are getting very close. We did 5 points for the first round. You want to start getting a little heavier with each round? Maybe go 7 points for
the
winners.
Sure.
All right. Next round will be 10, and we'll give a 15-point winner for the national championship.
All right. We'll do that. Well, we got 2 games this week, New Year's Day. That leads us to the Final Four. Have they dubbed this anything? I mean, is it college football's Final Four?
I don't know if they're going to try and take that or not. All I know is that for whatever unknown reason, they are on a Thursday and a Friday night, and no one wins in that scenario. But at least we get to enjoy New Year's Eve and New Year's Day.
Yes, indubitably. All right, everybody. Well, that's all we got for you this week. I know that sounds like nothing, but we really gave you everything. So what more can you ask for? We will be back for another episode in another week, but this has been First and Goal.